I'm not sure the film Pontypool is pure fiction. It's too close to reality to even call allegoric. It's more like an exaggeration. Ideas, as neural patterns live in the brain, can regulate and originate behavior and can spread from one brain to another. In this episode, we'll think about the concepts of semantic contagion and rational malware. A virus is nature's little glitch. It has genetic material, instructions for replication, but no machinery for doing the work, so we don't know whether to call it alive or not. Outside of a cell, it's inanimate, but once inside, it hijacks a cell and turns it into a factory for making more of itself. The same can be said about ideas. Words can be written in a notebook, then stuffed in a storage box, and so long as that notebook stays closed, the ideas inside are inert. But if your great-grandkids pull that box down 60 years later and find your notebook, the ideas can get into their skulls and start bouncing around and replicating and spreading to their friends' brains. Suppose you wrote a joke, which is a formula for laughter, and 60 years in the future, those symbols end up compelling a physiological response in people who weren't even born when you scribbled them. Even if I do something as simple as say the word yawn right now, it might hijack your lungs for a moment and make them do something you didn't plan on doing. Something I planned on you doing, without having a clue who or where you are. Think of both viruses and ideas as little bits of code. They contain information about how to perform functions. To install themselves in compel function, they have to be a good fit. Even airborne viruses rarely jump from one animal species to another, for the same reason telling a joke in Hindi won't get a laugh out of someone who only speaks English. In software, a function is stored and inactive until it's called upon. App extensions are little bits of code you can install to add functionality. Software viruses are little bits of code that either steal intel or stuff a wrench in the gears. That is, they operate for someone else's purposes, probably contrary to your own, and/or they decrease functionality. Some ideas are useful extensions of your personality software. Some ideas are malware. I contend that quite a few concepts in modern psychology are of the latter sort. They spread around from brain to brain, replicating themselves and partially crippling their hosts. They make logical sense, which means they're designed to interlock with the software of your mind. But just because they fit doesn't mean they belong. A virus can get into your lungs. That doesn't mean it's good for you to have there. If something decreases your notion of autonomy or relegates locus of control outside of the self, then it's a pernicious, crippling thing to accept, no matter how reasonable it appears. There are practically infinite sentences you can construct within the bounds of logic. We shouldn't settle on the proposition that one is just as good as any other, simply for being valid. We all have goals we want to accomplish, and that requires pragmatism. Concepts about the self impact the brain's performance. One telling event in history was when the movie Sybil came out in the 80s, popularizing the concept of split personalities. And for the years that followed, this extremely rare psych disorder suddenly became all the rage, with tens of thousands of patients being convinced by their therapists that they had multiple distinct selves. It let you off the hook for all your bad behavior, and who are you to argue with an expert? So much of how we perceive reality is constructed through social cues, and much of our behavior is shaped according to the roles we feel we're supposed to fill. A diagnosis can become a sort of typecasting because, upon hearing of it, people might no longer treat you as a freewheeling individual, but as a category of people they need to behave a certain way around. And you, experiencing this shift from multiple people, might adaptively change your behavior to fit these interactions, playing into the role, gradually becoming the stereotype. Continuing with Sybil as our case study, let me read you a couple book jackets. Rewriting the Soul, Multiple Personality and the Sciences of Memory by Ian Hacking. Multiple personality disorder became a kind of mental illness. It became a kind of thing that someone could have. This is what hacking refers to as semantic contagion, page 238. Before its meaning became prevalent in society, one could not describe oneself as a person of that kind. There were confused individuals who were, either deliberately or pre-reflectively, seeking to dissociate themselves from memories of painful events. These people, however, could not have described themselves as having the disorder, nor could people in psychology diagnose their patients with this term. Once MPD became a kind of thing, it became a way for individuals to understand themselves and understand people around them. Next book, Creating Hysteria, Women and Multiple Personality Disorder, 1999, by Joanne Acocella. From 1985 to 1995, an estimated 40,000 Americans, most of them women, were told they suffered from multiple personality disorder. Feminists, fundamentalists, and a substantial portion of the mental health community endorsed this sibling of America. Sensation-seeking television talk shows took up the MPD rallying cry. In Creating Hysteria, Joanne Acocella tells a riveting tale of therapists betraying their patients, of a psychotherapy profession at war within its own ranks, and finally of ex-patients rising up and putting an end to the MPD scandal. Goofy glitch, but let's up the ante. In his 2000 book, The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell tells us about how in Micronesia, suicides were extremely rare before the 1960s, until the son of a famous family hanged himself over being torn between two women. He gave up everything to convince the world how sad he was about being rich and double-loved, and in short order, the irony propelled him to legendary status. This event reverberated through the tiny islands like an earthquake, and in the years thereafter came tsunami waves of teenage copycats swinging from ropes over bouts of romantic stupidity. The action was communicative, symbolic, a way for histrionic little Micronesians to express the pain of their jilted souls. They needed everyone to know their feelings were just as real and important and powerful as those of that famous kid. I think it's fair to call that viral code packet maladaptive, don't you? Tragic accident, a glitch in nature. What happens when it's not an accident, though? In early 1920s America, cigarette smoking was primarily the domain of men, seen as unladylike, and among women associated mainly with prostitution. Freud's double-nephew, Edward Bernays, was so successful converting isolationists into supporters of World War I for the government's Committee on Public Information that in 1928, the American Tobacco Company hired him to get women to start smoking. He accomplished this by a strategy of tying smoking to the idea of liberation. He staged a dramatic public display of women suffragists lighting up torches of freedom during New York City's Easter Day parade, and instructed the press to use that phrase, torches of freedom, and that it was to show that they were equal to men. The Torches of Freedom campaign continued for a decade, and the tobacco industry profits flourished. In his own words, "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." Universal literacy was supposed to educate the common man to control his environment. Once he could read and write, he would have a fit mind to rule. So ran the democratic doctrine. But instead of a mind, universal literacy has given him rubber stamps inked with advertising slogans, with editorials, with published scientific data, with the trivialities of the tabloids and the platitudes of history, but quite innocent of original thought. Each man's rubber stamps are the duplicates of millions of others, so that when those millions are exposed to the same stimuli, all receive identical imprints. It may seem an exaggeration to say that the American public gets most of its ideas in this wholesale fashion. The mechanism by which ideas are disseminated on a large scale is propaganda, in the broad sense of an organized effort to spread a particular belief or doctrine. End quote. Fact is, large-scale social engineering goes as far back as any religion. Humans have always governed their populations through intentionally crafted semantic contagions. So I think that's enough of a primer, and you're ready to hear what I have to say next. You're full of viruses. They snuck in through culture, bred in your head, and may have even built a cage around your personality if you unwittingly assented. Some of these were natural accidents, and some, I suspect, were not. For those I'm about to mention, I'll be doling out antivirals one by one in the form of upcoming Patreon episodes. If they've been released, you'll find links in the description. Now listen closely. Stress, anxiety, panic, depression, trauma, happiness, self-esteem, identity, addiction, and anger. With these 9 words, psychologists have crippled our species. Hey guys, quick note before I go. I know some of these podcast topics are a little goofy, so if you like the way I think, but you really want to take advantage of the best of what my brain has to offer, look up my books on Amazon or Audible. My first book, Augmenting Willpower, is a field manual for human psychology that emphasizes personal accountability, while my second book, An Idea is Not a Product, is a guide for building routines and systems that force you to put your money where your mouth is. Both titles are available in all formats, so you can listen to the audio on the go, easily search topics by keyword in the ebook, and the paperback fits right in your pocket.